Hi. I've been thinking a lot about what qualifies as horror lately. Sure, you have your Chuckies, It's, Saws, and Scooby Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, but maybe stripping back what we believe horror is and can be might be able to help us find the true meaning of horror. Horror as an art form in and of itself, rather than a genre. Horror is able to take the form of so many other concepts and methods of conveying its ideas. Not many quote-unquote genres are able to have its rules contorted and bended in such a way to encapsulate so many vibes. Horror on its own can consist of video games such as D no Shokotatsu, or Gore Screaming Show, or Subway Midnight, or films such as Scooby-Doo 2, Monsters Unleashed, and Love and Pop, and Suspiria. But none of them are as good as Scooby-Doo 2, Monsters Unleashed, on the basis of a lack of Linda Cardellini. Sorry, I made the rules. This is my world, bitch. I feel like we should change the background a little. Keep it thematic and all. Editor. There we go. Naturally, for something so versatile as horror, there'd be stories created by those outside the societal, patriarchal standard. Creatives willing to push the boundaries of what is expected and accepted of their art forms. And queer horror happens to have some of the best examples of creatively pushing the envelope of what could be viewed on the silver screen. Queer horror has had quite the push this year by a little-known film titled I Saw the TV Glow. For good reason too. What a good fucking film. If I hadn't already known I was trans, this would have had a much bigger impact on me, but oh well. Beggars can't be choosers. I did almost cry like a little bitch though, picking up my copy of NBA Showtime on N64 from the mailbox, thinking about its ending though. So yeah, pretty good movie all things considered. No, at the time of writing this, I have not seen Jane's other work. I'm sorry to disappoint. But like any and all film connoisseurs, I have seen queer filmmaking legend Donald Farmer's hit 2002 cult horror flick, An Erotic Vampire in Paris, though. There's a lot to be said about early digicam films. This tangibility that isn't ever seen in big budget productions. I mean, fuck, you don't know true film until you've watched Tommy Chat Just Emailed Me. For example, there's a really pretty shot in the middle of this thing that I fell in love with. It practically made the movie for me. This Ferris wheel here is something I'm still thinking about as of me writing this. The way the lights are illuminated makes it feel weirdly ethereal to me while still looking and feeling like somewhere I could exist in. Ethereal is the word I would honestly use to describe this film, even with how I described certain scenes earlier. Much of the film, while yeah, taking place in the, as far as I know, real-life Paris, has a sort of grandiose vibe to it all. It's a little like Suspiria in that sense of having its main protagonist dropped into a new facet of the world and that world forcing her to crawl through it until she finds herself with our erotic vampire, Isabel. The film's probably unintentional use of shaky cam due to someone having to actually stand and film most of the scenes makes it really feel as though you're watching something that shouldn't be seen, as if you're the peeping Tom. Intimacy through body and camera language is a big part of the core of this one for me. The sex scenes are honestly some of the best parts of this movie, and I know that's going to come with a barrage of Doge memes or whatever the fuck, but they capture a real sense of carnal knowledge. Every intimate scene is followed with these dreamlike visuals really encompassing this mood too. There's a real sense of desire, both in the sense of lust and love ruminating between both ladies. Long, meticulous strokes across bodies, the characters' facial expressions, the way they stare at each other as though they wanted to be fused together. Some fucking Evangelion, like, Third Impact type shit. There's a lot of power in that for me. I think its loudness on sexual intimacy enchanted me in a way not much other art really could, or at least not that I've seen. Queer horror is such an interesting and profound subset of horror that's been just alluded to for decades. Horror itself has always operated on a fear and sympathy for the other, a curiosity of the origins of said other, a pity for the other. All of which, according to author Abigail Waldron from her book Queer Screams, A History of LGBTQ Survival Through the Lens of American Horror Cinema, contribute to a wider problem of dehumanization across the medium. Waldron points out that the intrinsic curiosity in audiences causes this sort of disconnect in how they see people of other walks of life. It's definitely not hard to see how this connects to the ways queer people are portrayed in art, including film, oftentimes as a threat to American values and the nuclear family. Even outside of same-sex relationships, there was a sort of uneasiness amongst folks. I really like this excerpt from the book Monsters in the Closet, Homosexuality in the Horror Film.
Queer, unlike the rather polite categories of gay and lesbian, revels in the discourse of the loathsome, the outcast, the idiomatically prescribed position of same-sex desire. Unlike petitions for civil rights, queer revels constitute a kind of activism that attacks the dominant notion of the natural.
I feel like this is more indicative of how queer people were a very natural target of the spectacle of horror films. By this time in history, there wasn't the wealth of knowledge available about queer lives as there is in the modern day. Queerness as a concept came with a lot of barriers to break down in the patriarchal society the United States was and is still in, but especially back then. And art is a very good and reputable mechanism to explore these new ideas and come to terms with them, hopefully. Now, many early examples people would point out for themes of queer expression are implicit, like many examples of this sort of thing, but I believe that one of the defining examples of queer horror cinema comes in the form of Robert Hiltzik Sleepaway Camp. Based on a summer camp Hiltzik attended as a kid, Sleepaway Camp was released in 1983 almost immediately to cult classic status. But why? Well, that's what I'm here for. Hi, have we met by chance? Hey, why are you looking at me like that? Bug off. Sleepaway Camp on a surface level is what you would come to expect from a slasher film. People dying and such. But what separated in Hiltzik's mind was the subversion aspect. More so who was dying. I know that sounds fucking weird, but Hiltzik really wanted the kids to have more autonomy in a sense.
The idea was to do something different. Instead of having all the counselors being murdered and do all the killing, let the kids have some fun. I wanted to do something a little bit more interesting than just somebody running around with a knife stabbing people and, let the kids be kids. Entertainment.
Hiltzik had this really hard rule to only have actual children playing the characters, which fucking rules. It really adds a garnish to Hiltzik's electrifying stew, using the summer camp setting as a way to lay out a narrative about self-discovery. I believe that's where a lot of the heart of this one comes off. One of the film's most prominent themes is sexuality and self-expression. Aspects such as the way the kids are dressed really play into this with these tight, colorful clothes, or, well, the fact that like a good portion of these fuckers are, procreating. I think admittedly its depth is lacking, but what isn't lacking is the amount of honestly really creative kills. I mean, who hasn't wanted to shove curling irons down their enemies' holes? Or have them fall into boiling water? Fuck yeah, girlies. Man, if anything, please watch this for the kills. Trust me when I say you will not be disappointed. Even with Hiltzik's lack of experience at the time, he's able to strike the right chord to make these parts really stand out. It fucking spectacularly at that. The suspense of who was the killer honestly wore off relatively quickly, even on a first watch for me. But I think people who try to guess these things out loud are some of my least favorite people to watch movies with ever, so there's a silver lining with this. Cuts out the middleman, honestly, and just lets you stick around for the ride. There didn't really need to be a mystery element involved in my eyes. I think it's high time that we discuss the main meat here of this film. The one shot that has defined its legacy for potentially the rest of time. This ending shot of the killer, Angela, naked as she screams in terror after being found by one of the camp counselors. I do think inherently the inclusion of this detail is a tad spontaneous, but I'm more than sure that was the idea just going off of interviews with Hiltzik. This does play back into the idea from earlier about how queerness is seen as much more of a curiosity than anything, though. The way Hiltzik speaks on the ending is as follows.
Well, the way I wrote the movie was, I came up with the beginning and I came up with the end. I wanted a good beginning to grab the audience right away and then hold on to them. Then I wanted a shocking ending or a twist that they would talk about when they walked out of the movie theater. The psychosexual angle came about because once I picked that ending, I thought I had to foreshadow it. Otherwise, I'm cheating the audience. So there had to be that issue. Even if it's just below the surface, it had to be presented.
It does explain why those undertones are very subdued at the very least. I'd come to assume that angle came into play somewhat late in the writing. Even so, the first Sleepaway Camp is an essential piece of queer cinema in my eyes. Its use of psychosexual themes is still interesting to analyze and dissect even in the modern day. But how do the other entries hold up? Hiltzik actually sold the rights to Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3, with the former being handed out to producer Jerry Silva. Now, it wasn't all that uncommon to pass movie franchises amongst directors at all, though going in for my viewing of this one for this here video, it got me wondering how the themes of the first would be carried over. I mean, hey, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, honestly, in the original, far from it. So, fuck it, let's see how this plays out.
Except this girl, she wasn't a girl. Phoebe, let's go. She was really a he.
Nice. Great. Yeah, I think we should probably talk about this. I feel like this sequel is a far more hostile outlook towards Angela's identity just from this opening scene. A few of the kids are telling campfire stories, as one of them tells the story of Angela Baker from the last movie. Yeah, I had watched 2 once before deciding to make this, and somehow this line,
"The doctors gave him a sex change, and our parents' taxes paid for it,"
just slipped out of my noggin. The specific moment solidified my reading of this movie. I don't know how far I'd go to say as it affecting the first film's themes, but it was still a shock to me. Alright, this is like my 4th or 5th fucking time talking about this. Hi, hello, it's me, your friendly neighborhood Rose, or Jupiter as I like to also call myself. Hi, hello, I just kind of wanted to pop in and discuss Pamela Springsteen's Angela a little bit more, because I think I think some of the theming that they write in, like, as intentional or unintentional as it is, I think it's really interesting, because the justifications that Pamela's character have to kill her victims are these things like fucking smoking pot or having sex, and I think that's really interesting because I think Pamela herself, or at least as, you know, probably the writers and definitely a lot of like the characters in the film kind of right. You know, she's having a very, I guess, defiant, un-Puritan, un-Christian lifestyle. Having Pamela's character be this super Puritan, kind of upholding Christian valued person, very uptight sort of gig. I think that's really interesting. I think it's probably unintentional. I don't know. It's really interesting. I just have to wonder if there's some sort of weird meta commentary going on with it. Hopefully this wasn't too long of a ramble. Back to the actual video now. I hope y'all are enjoying. Thanks for listening. Now, like the last movie, I don't think much of the queer or psychosexual theming is there, but somehow even less so here. And the first, there was a genuine attempt to speak a little on queerness and sexuality. Angela's backstory is actually rather heartbreaking, and it's not thrown away per se. It's just kind of harshy here, at least what little of discussion there is about it, which honestly halts right after the opening. It just reads as very regressive to me, especially when its prequel was a very progressive work for its time. I'm just disappointed, to be honest. At least otherwise, it's a really fun time with some really exceptional kills and acting in my eyes. I'm no expert on camp at all, but this sounds about what I would expect. I honestly adore the quips between the children throughout these films. Eat Shit and Live is honestly genuine, actually factually one of the rawest lines in any work ever. Sleepaway Camp 2 is a hearty good time for sure, but I still feel like the beginning breaks a lot of the film for me, honestly. We have a weird relationship. I will say the absolute best quality of both of the sequels is Pamela Springsteen. Actual horror crush, honestly. Factual, actual prettiest horror girl ever. I would lay down my life for her, and she fucking kills it as Angela. So far, we've witnessed a high and a low in my honest opinion. Whatever dialogue was meant to be started was undermined for me, as I've stated, but I'm curious as to how 3 would play out, especially with yet another director on the helm. Michael Simpson. Well, I guess we just have to dive in and find out.
Alright, let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want a cup that overflows with love, although it's not enough to fill my heart. I want a barrel full of love, although I know it's not enough to fill my heart. Will still remain. I need an ocean full of love. Angela! The holes will still remain. And the Swiss cheese hot dogs. Like kindness can fill its holes. And love will dry.
You see, I've always wanted a little girl.
Hi, hello, it's me, Rose, or Jupiter, whichever or you want to call me, but I have a Patreon page that I've had up for a while now. It's only $1 a month if you'd like to join, it's never an obligation or anything. Any main videos that are big and whatever are always going to be out on this YouTube channel for free, but if you want an uncensored cut of this video right here, because I had to cover a lot of boy bits, girl bits, and everybody bits, it's there. You also get access to my Discord, and a pretty awesome special channel, and a bunch of really cool sneak peeks. You would have gotten to see about half of this video early, like really early, if you were there. And you also get your name in the credits and everything, like you just saw. But yeah, never an obligation or anything. If you would like to join, it's patreon.com/rose.mov. But otherwise, I hope y'all are enjoying the video. Sleepaway Camp 3 is better, actually. It's fucking awesome. Like, goddamn, I fucking love Sleepaway Camp 3. It starts out with a brand new camp setting out to promote kindness amongst the rich and the poor, which does allow for some nice character dynamics. Nothing particularly unseen with this series, but there is a tad bit of spice added. I think it's just nice. This movie is fucking hilarious, by the way. Nothing beats eat shit and live, but also no line or combination of words in any form of art ever can, so there's that. Like I've stated not that long ago, I adore the cast of these movies, and this isn't any different. And thankfully, this movie's fucking based. She kills a cop. There's also a kid with a restraint kink. She does kill 2 of the few black kids that are in this, but also Angela states that she hates bigots. I love to see an ally. I feel like that should be telling of where this movie stands with its theming, maybe? I'm not so sure. Like the first movie, it's also rarely, if ever, outwardly hostile towards Angela's identity. Trans women are the coolest. Have I mentioned that Angela Baker is the prettiest? God damn. I never thought I'd want a wife of a horror villain like this. Even if you don't, we both know that. This would mark the end of Sleepaway Camp for a number of years. 16 to be exact. There's no exact reason per se, but I know Hiltzik was busy with the family, so I assume interest was just lost as each film started receiving worse and worse critical reception. And the continuation also never caught on, sadly enough. I genuinely might be broken though, because Return to Sleepaway Camp was one of my favorite entries. I don't know why, but not gonna lie, my ass was howling during a good portion of the runtime. Genuinely, I thought this shit was hilarious, which I can't tell if that's my fault or not. The aesthetic is very of its time, which is how the originals were, just with better technology, obviously. I can't put my pin on the exact words, but there's always something up with cheapo-ish films from the mid-2000s, such as your Happy Madisons and whatnot. That pre-HD look to films, I don't know, I mess with it heavy. Though I almost sort of think this film fails at what it might be trying to say. The film's main gimmick, I guess, was to bring back a good bit of the original cast, such as Paul D'Angelo as Ronnie from the original film, and the star of the show, Felicia Rose, as Angela, though you meet a slew of new counselors and campers, including one named Alan. His narrative was similar to Angela's in the sense of him being an outcast, although much more abrasive and outwardly weird. Much of this one's runtime is mean-spirited attempts at breaking down Alan for the fun of it. To be honest, I wasn't sure how I felt half the time. I could tell the film was wanting to portray a scared, probably most likely neurodivergent kid reacting to the people around him, but it felt like a whiplash to me on my viewing. You could tell that those who worked on this did want to give this series a fresh take, but were kind of shackled by the constraints of this returning cast. I think picks like Paul D'Angelo were fucking stellar, but honestly I think Felicia Rose's Angela ruins at least my particular idea of this film's themes and narrative. The movie was building up to Alan being the killer, but fuck nah, it's Angela again. Her performance is fucking amazing though, fantastic even. It was genuinely nice seeing her again for the last few minutes of the film, but the way she's included rubs me the wrong way. She's shoehorned in within the last few minutes of the film, with no real catharsis for any of the cast in the ending. The ending was trying to pay homage to the original, but it didn't hit. It's so weird. There's a recurring plot line in here that I actually really dug. A lot of the kids believe that Alan was the killer, while others such as Ronnie suspect that Angela had returned somehow. I think that if Alan were the killer, this might have landed differently with me. Though I did like the inclusion of Angela's cousin Ricky. Having someone genuinely want to be there for her, especially Ricky after all these years, was really warming for me. And he's fucking base and he doesn't stand for transphobia. Love that man.
Robert Hiltzik being on the director's chair meant that the probably accidental but nonetheless present genius of his writing really shines here. I went off about the whiplash of feelings I had about the constant bullying of Alan, but it kind of added to the experience for me too. As a once neurodivergent child, now neurodivergent adult, I really resonated with his character in a way. His suffering kind of embodies the type of pain people like him can go through. By the way, this is total and utter headcanon if you couldn't tell. There's really nothing here that explicitly states he's neurodivergent of any sort, but he does have a very difficult time with social cues and often needs a decent amount of support around him most of the time. He even has a little comfort place away from everyone with his little frog friends. I felt that massively. And also, this is Robert Hiltzik, and he did make Sleepaway Camp 1, which, in my personal opinion, is probably the most thematically relevant film in the Sleepaway Camp series. So, take that for what you will. Even though it's very obviously exaggerated for the sake of the movie, it still displays a very real pain that I and a lot of other people have had to deal with. It's uncomfortable in a lot of the best ways for me, but it really isn't for the faint of heart. But also, if you decided to actually watch this movie, you probably would have been able to assume that. Also, once more, the kills here. God fucking damn. I know, but damn, that recession must have made people fucking feral. Like, there certainly wasn't any penis ripping before 2008, right? We certainly need to bring it back in 2025. These kills feel far more elaborate than before. It's really refreshing to see. This thing is a bloodfest. Oh, and that post-credit scene, peak.
Also, hey, did you know that this was Isaac Hayes' last performance in literally anything? Out of all the people who want to be in the gay summer camp movies, I kinda just didn't think it'd be him, to be honest. Fucking amazing though. But the real finale would come in 2012 with Sleepaway Camp 4. And it sucks. It really just sucks. I wanted to give it a fair shot because I thought it'd be lame otherwise, but damn, this was even more disappointing somehow. Even after looking at reviews for this thing, Alison Kramer as a concept is pretty fucking neat and scary, but history did not allow for this to be anywhere near developed or as good as it could have been.
They make a really big deal out of Alison Kramer at the very beginning, being this victim of Angela's that's overcoming her trauma by coming back to the camp for a while, but they don't really do much with that. That's all, I don't think.
Sleepaway Camp 4 was salvaged from like half an hour of footage filmed before the original studio went bankrupt and clips from other films. It's practically an elongated clip show episode. I try not to advise skipping art because it's obvious there's almost always a sense of passion, even when it comes to bad art, but it's still disappointing. The fact this footage was officially released in any capacity at all is spectacular, and again, I'm sure the people working on this release truly wanted to do something with it, but it misses the landing real hard. The original portions do try to tell a unique story, but with only like 20 or so minutes of runtime to literally do anything with that, it kinda just ends and feels weak overall. I kinda just sat there confused after hitting the credits. Honestly, my only thought was just, what a film. And with that, the Sleepaway Camp series is pretty much done. Robert Hiltzik has gone on to say that he'd like to make another film, but that's very tentative and probably unlikely to happen. Last time anything was said on this was like 2020 or so, to be quite honest, I doubt that at this point. A shame too that the series ended on 4, but life goes on, I guess. But something I failed to discuss much of until now was Angela Baker herself. She is the main DNA of Sleepaway Camp after all. Much of the thematic depth of the series' overall narrative lies within her. So, what's up with her? As the franchise went on, there was less of an incentive to emphasize those elements, especially not when you needed to add some dick ripping. I say this lovingly, by the way, but Angela's story is actually really interesting to me. The way her trauma and the way she copes with it is really well executed to me. She's shut in, she keeps to herself, and she's generally weak. Take this scene of Angela getting thrown in the water, for example. Since her dad and brother died from that boating accident at the beginning of the film, of course she'd be shaken from that and not fuck with water. Hell, I feel like this was the root of her distaste towards rowdy teenagers from the later films. Though, of course, naturally you'd ask, what about her transition? See, I just don't think there's much that's telling to her overall narrative. It was always meant to be a device to shock the audience rather than actually conveying a narrative of queerness inherently. I do think these movies have a lot of brilliance and that they were very meticulously crafted, even from a narrative standpoint, but like I've iterated on before, I think our transness is just that. Now obviously that isn't not intriguing on its own, but it's hard to shake off that it's all for show. It was made during a widespread panic about queer lives in America, and made by a white cishet man. Obviously I don't believe for a second there was ill will with any of the material he made at all, but there is a nature to this type of film, and especially the person who made it, and the people who continue to work on these films. It's an exploitation film after all, but that does not mean the representation is free from all criticism. The way Angela's transness is handled is a bit odd in my eyes. Hiltzik's interpretation of it, while never outright taking a side per se, really does kind of reek of the common narrative of transness inherently being forced upon someone. And even that homosexuality breaks the nuclear family as shown in that final scene with Aunt Martha. It's just a little fucked up, but I think I view this more as a narrative catharsis in a sense. I don't think it's uncommon for a lot of people to outright want to cause harm to people that treated them poorly. Eye for an eye type shit. And I especially relate to Angela growing up in a body that she didn't really want to be in.
You know, I was editing this, as I have been doing for about the last month or something now, something of that sort, but as I was editing, I kind of remembered a pretty infamous story that I feel like mirrored this movie either by coincidence or maybe by pure intent, because this particular story is pretty recent in comparison to the, release of Sleepaway Camp. And that's the story of David Raymer. If you don't know the story of David Raymer, he had a botched circumcision as, a really young child, and instead of, I don't fucking know, anything else, doctors decided to just give him a vagina and just force him to live as a girl for, the rest of his life. And eventually, he actually committed suicide. Now, that's really sad, and fuck John Money. It's just something I kind of thought of, because I genuinely think, Robert Hiltzik could have gotten some of the inspiration for this movie from this. If he watches this, one of all, hi, and two of all, please comment below if you had any knowledge of this or any intent, because now I'm really interested to see if this, piece of transgender history was in any way, a part of your inspiration to make this? I'm just really curious. Anyways, goodbye.
And the fact that it has been reclaimed by queer film fanatics and historians is quite beautiful, I'm sure. Throughout my viewing of these movies, I wondered to myself what the lasting impact of not only Sleepaway Camp, but exploitation films as a whole were. Much of American film history was plagued with censorship issues following the Hays Code. For a little context, the Hays Code was a guideline of rules set back around the 1930s till the 60s, pretty much squashing a ton of films that didn't uphold the moral sensibilities of the American people. There's a lot more to it than just this, though. It was meant as a way to streamline distribution of films to other countries by just playing it safe, but damn, yikes. Yeah. If you even know a smidge about American history, you can infer what many of these regulations might have been. So, exploitation films inherently were meant to break many of these barriers. Many of them handled very contemporary topics like drug use, race, and even queerness. Exploitation as an artistic movement is really intriguing. Many of these films were quite ahead of their time and very transgressive, but also glorified these topics in a way to create intrigue in the audiences. A lot more of the popular exploitation films in the modern day in the West were created during periods such as the Cold War, where younger generations felt pretty spiteful towards the country. The movement also allowed for many independent filmmakers to get their starts, like Donald Farmer and the such. I mean, hey, have some tits, some blood, fuck it, have everything, and there we go. This mindset gave us some truly unique works that wouldn't have been made otherwise, though. Exploitation is quite dense, honestly, which is what makes it so interesting to me. I've been thinking about how we discuss problematic art for much of this year after I worked on that anime films vid. I've been on a sort of journey of discovering weird, archaic works that others would shun and not give a real chance. A lot of online discourse and social osmosis surrounding art is heavily based on this need to correct artists in a sense. This need to call out works for their problematic material, which on its own is never a bad thing per se, but where the problems start to come in are when these narratives start to get parroted by others with no actual conversation about the works otherwise. I'm sure much of it isn't in particularly bad faith per se, but the pushback towards more transgressive art circles back to conservatism. This idea that all work should conform to a morality standard in order to be worth remembering or talking about. I am no stranger to discussing how controversial work should be allowed to exist, but what I want to add to this discussion is how we should have conversations, not just about the art, but with it too. Let me explain. I think we should try to come into our own conclusions about what we're experiencing. I believe that we should be doing our homework in a sense. Art is the product of so many circumstances that to watch a 10-minute video or even reading a review or tweet online is not conductive at all of what these works are trying to convey in the slightest, especially in the modern landscape where many of these people attempt to drive engagement first and foremost, meaning there's a lot of bad faith actors out there who couldn't care less about the art that they're discussing. Take the time to not only ruminate on your personal experience with what you engage with, but also take the time to learn what the artist wanted to convey and judge from there, breaking down our barriers in a sense and opening ourselves up to more stories that might be considered quote-unquote offensive actually allows us to be more empathetic and caring human beings. Applying a one-size-fits-all mentality to it does nothing in my eyes to the path of actual progress. And that brings me here. What impact did Sleepaway Camp have, at least on me specifically, and potentially the other hundreds of thousands of fans dedicated to this franchise? I mean, hell, the Sleepaway Camp website, helped run by fans of these movies, has been an invaluable resource to me in the making of this script. I think what's most interesting is how unabashedly queer these movies are. No implications, no bullshit, no nothing. Angela is trans. Sleepaway Camp is queer. Sure, the films can and have fallen into some of the same traps as many of their contemporaries and even films of the modern day, but I feel like on average, these movies are far kinder and more empathetic to the queer experience, or at least as a weirdo freak into art for weirdo freaks. I really resonate with it. Angela is me. I feel her pain. The ache in her body screaming at her, begging for reprieve from the life that she was forced upon. Alan is me. I felt his anger and confusion for the way I acted in social situations. I want to cry for both Angela and Alan in a way. My suffering in theirs parallel to a kind of scary degree. So these films acted as a sense of catharsis to me. That little person inside who deeply hated the way they were treated and regarded felt these storylines deeply. And I'm sure others resonated with these in similar ways to me.
Before I finally close this thing off, I'd like to leave you with a few last words. I want more trash. I want more unapologetically, unabashedly queer art. I want more degeneracy. If you decided to watch or listen or engage however you feel, all the way until the end of this video, please advocate for more trashy, gross, disgustingly beautiful art like this. This stuff genuinely might be the thing that holds the key to your heart if you ever decide to engage with it. Please, I implore you to watch more of some of this stuff. Obviously, pull out your critical brain and all that, but please open your heart for even just a little bit.